Here. Okay, I want to welcome everyone to Finding Good Franchises, which is the show for the courageous people who are meant for more and are willing to do something about it. This is the place for you to find good franchises. So on the show today, we're going to be talking about you and your journey going into franchise ownership. Many of you may be trying to decide what is the best franchise for you? And there really are a lot of options out there. And most people tend to gravitate towards or be drawn towards the most well-known concepts. And so we meet a lot of people in our day-to-day who think that there are only the biggest brand names of franchises out there. And that's what they relate to franchising. And so they'll usually mention a large food brand or a large retail brand and think that that's really the extent of franchising. But that is actually a teeny tiny little section of franchising and what is available in the marketplace. I know when I first started in this industry, I was shocked at how much opportunity there was out there. And I thought that you had to have millions of dollars to open a McDonald's franchise in order to get into franchising. But that's just simply not the case. And so why are so many people interested in these well-known franchise systems? And the reason that we've seen is that they're wanting a sure bet. It's all about security. It's about reduction of risk. And so they feel that if they're established, well, then it has to be well run. It has to be the best offer for the franchise buyer. But in our experience, giant brands, which we call empire brands, they're often a hard deal for the bulk of the franchise owners that are looking at them. But they can be great if it's the right person that's purchasing that. It really just depends on that specific buyer's profile. What is their needs? What are their background skills that they're bringing to that business? What's their investment and so on? It always, so the answer just kind of always ends up being, it depends. And so today we're going to talk through that fuzzy area of it depends. So on our panel today, we have Eric Reese, who is a partner at Lathrop GPM. That's a law firm with over 500 plus lawyers and offices nationwide. He is the 2020-2021 Best Lawyers in America Award recipient. Go, Eric. He's a CPA and business advisor, as well as an independent business owner. We also have with us Amanda Ramirez. She's a national franchise trainer, an award-winning franchise broker, and she has worked on within the international space and with the immigration space. So she's helped people to immigrate to the US and assisted them in finding franchises that would allow them to do that, obtain their visas, everything from building out those locations to management of the locations. She's done it all. And then I'm Sabrina Wall. I am a national franchise trainer, as I've also owned or operated 27 different franchise locations, both for myself and other investors within 4 different systems. I'm the 2020 CEOs of the Year recipient through the Orlando Business Journal and the CEO of the Franchise Brokers Association. So welcome, Eric and Amanda, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start with some of the basics, because this is kind of more of a complex topic. I wanted to ask you, Amanda, can you help us to paint the picture and define for us what are the different stages of growth within a franchise? So what defines a big one versus a small one?
Sure. So think of it as a bell curve. So when you look at a bell curve, you have different franchises in different stages. So let's start from the bottom. So when you look at the bottom of the bell curve, you have what we call emerging brands. So the emerging brands are brands that are new, not necessarily as a business, but as a franchise, right? So you're looking between 1 to about 25 units. So those first 25 units, they're new as a franchise, they're still growing. But then we have to identify, just because it's an emerging brand, just because it's a new model, doesn't mean that it's a bad franchise. There are some incredible models that are still new. So we as a company, and this is a part of the work that an FBA broker will do, is to identify what are the pros and the cons of that brand, and can that brand be a good fit for that particular candidate. So then we move on into the partner franchises. The partner franchises are, you know, kind of going up on the bell curve. So up to 100 units. So from 25 all the way to 100 units, you're looking at partner franchises. They're actually my favorite because they're not new, but they're not at the top of the bell curve yet. So there's still, there's a lot of opportunity for open territories. They already have some track record. So if you're the type of candidate that really cares and you really want to know the numbers, the financials, you want to validate which some strong owners that are already operating, then you have the ability to do so with a brand that still has a lot of open territory and availability. And there's still, and I would like Eric to speak to that a little bit too, what we call flexibility in negotiations when it comes to the size of the territory, the training, and even other things in the franchise agreement that an empire brand may not be open to negotiating. Then we get into plug and play. So plug and play franchises are actually what we call the, it's the cream of the crop, right? Once you hit plug and play status, that means you've really made it as a franchise system. And this is data that was recently pulled from Franchise Grade, but only, it's less than 5% of all brands in the United States actually hit plug and play status, which means that less than 5% brands have less than 100 units. So once you get to 100 units, it's a pretty big deal. And that really gets you to the top of the bell curve. But then you have some cons, which are, you know, finding territory. No, it becomes a little bit saturated. So if you're the type of candidate that wants to dominate a market, you want to own multiple units, you really want to scale and grow. If your area, so if your demographics already have multiple of those franchises already, then it's going to limit the ability for you to do that. So you may be stuck with the last territory that's available for you to buy. So really, it doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It just depends on what your goals are for you and your family. So then we get into empire. So the empire brands, believe it or not, are actually going down the bell curve. They're no longer at the top. And the main reason is once you hit empire, you've made it. You're good. You have over 500 units, you're operating really well, you have tons of inquiries every single day, and people know your brand. So let's use McDonald's as an example. If you try to call McDonald's today, the chances of you actually getting someone on the phone are very, very small because they just get thousands of inquiries a day. They already have their development schedule. They already have multi-unit owners. They have no desire to even consider a new franchise owner because they have so many franchisees already in their system. So it becomes really difficult for a broker and for anybody trying to get into a McDonald's. So I always say, I'm sorry, but you missed the train. You know, you should have gotten in earlier. You know, and this is why when you work with somebody who understands where the brands are in the proper stages, we can help you identify really good models that are still emerging, partner, plug and play, and they're still accepting new owners, because once you hit empire, it becomes really difficult. So kind of explained the stages, but then there's one last one that kind of stays on the side, and it's called hybrid. So the hybrid models are going to be these big companies that acquire other franchises that are underneath them. So one example would be a multi-millionaire company called Neighborly. So Neighborly has the strongest home improvements types of franchises underneath their umbrella. So you can see 30, 40 different types of brands that are underneath them. So really there are a lot of benefits for a franchise owner because the franchise may be new, but they're under a very well capitalized model where they're going to have lots of support when it comes to operations, to marketing. I mean, they have like close to 60 people in their marketing department alone. So you really get the benefits of operating with a plug and play brand, or almost like an empire brand, but it's still a newer model that you can still get all the benefits of an emerging brand. So I think that explains it.
Good. One of the things that you mentioned is that it's hard to get a hold of these brands once they hit a certain level, but just because they get bombarded with inquiries. I remember talking to a Haagen-Dazs franchise system, and they were saying that, you know, they get tons and tons of inquiries worldwide, and that they're not doing any in the US. And they were saying that she was saying, I get the inquiries. I look at their financial profile. I look at the area that they're in. I look at their background. If they don't, if they're not, they have to provide all that to me first. And if they're not something that a strategy we're trying to go to, I completely toss them out. If they are, then I will, so they don't respond or anything. Then she said, if they are, well, then I might send them another questionnaire. If they respond to that, then I'll open up and engage. If they don't, or they delay too long, we toss them out. And she said, that's just the way the system works. It's just, we have too many to go through to sort through it. And I know, Eric, you had told me something before about Chick-fil-A having just tons and tons of inquiries per year. Do you mind talking about that one?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, you have to decide what is the goal, and your goal should be independent business ownership that's successful.
Right.
And it becomes difficult when we start, while I don't disagree at all with Amanda's categorization of franchises by size, it becomes difficult when we use these rules of thumb to determine such an important decision as our own business, devoting our time and our money and our energy to our own business. And I'll share with you an example of how bigger is not always better. The SBA, the small business, what everybody knows is small business funding. The SBA used to put out a list of franchisors with high risk of SBA loan failure. And this was based upon their own experience of franchisees who have failed. They don't do that list anymore, and I'm not sure why. It was very helpful. Yeah. And people were always surprised when McDonald's had nearly a 20% failure rate for SBA loan recipients. Now, that doesn't mean McDonald's has a 20% failure rate. What it means is the people who got SBA loans for a period of time had a 20% failure rate, all right? And I always wondered, how could that be? And it had a lot of reasons to it, in part bad placement, overplacement of McDonald's franchises. You know, when you have nearly 50,000 units, very difficult not to become oversaturated or overplaced. And so bigger is not always better. I think that's the main thing. I don't have a problem with big systems, but bigger is not always better. And you can waste a lot of time and energy trying to get into a big system that you're simply either financially not qualified for or otherwise not qualified. Not that there's anything wrong with you, but let's say you own the system. When you got to 500 units, chances are you're getting pretty picky with your franchisees because you can be pretty picky. Generally, in units or big systems like that, the first people that the franchisor turns to for further development are its existing franchisees, because those are proven entities to that franchisor. They really don't have to train them. They know how they'll perform. And so that's one of the major roadblocks to a larger franchise system. Now, everybody has their idea of what a large franchise system is. In my opinion, once you reach 50 units, if I owned a franchisor with 50 units, I would consider it a success. A lot of people that I hang out with think 50 units is nothing. I went to a franchise conference one time where they talked about emerging franchise systems. And to them, emerging franchise systems was any franchisor with less than 500 units, okay? And I'm going, what, we represent Dairy Queen. We know what representing a large franchise is like, but I never considered 499 units an emerging brand. I consider that done, did, emerged already, okay? So again, there's not necessarily safety in a large system. I think it's also important to remember that we need to know what industry, what market we want to get into, whether it is food or whether it's home service franchises. We want to pick an industry that suits us, and then we want to find out what the offerings are within that industry, and then understand that a franchise system with 5 units, a franchise system with 15 units, you can do due diligence on all of those systems. And that's the key, right? Your due diligence, your answering of those questions that we've talked about in the past. How much will this cost me? How much money will I make? And does the franchisor have a system that is followed by its franchisees? And you can figure that out with 15 units just as well as you can figure that out with 500 units. So it's important not to fall into traps of I need a particular size, because you don't if you can do your due diligence and answer the questions in an acceptable way to fit with your business goals, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. So leading on to that, what, Eric, do you think are the things that someone should look for if they're buying a system that is an Empire brand? What's coming with that purchase?
Yeah, and one huge distinction is brand value, all right? One of the reasons why we buy into a franchise is not just because we can do our due diligence and figure out with reasonable certainty how much will it cost, how much will we make, and is there a system that we can follow? But one thing that comes with the McDonald's of the world is great brand value. And people sometimes don't understand what that is. Brand value isn't about the financial performance of its franchisees. Brand value is about value simply as a brand. And so let's talk about McDonald's, because A, Amanda brought it up first, and B, I love McDonald's. Quarter pounder with cheese is delicious. But let's talk about McDonald's brand value. People go to McDonald's because they know what they're going to get. They don't go there for the quality of burgers and French fries. Now, you need to understand what I'm saying there. That doesn't mean the hamburgers and French fries are bad at McDonald's. They're delicious, but they're not the best hamburgers in the world. They're the most consistent hamburgers in the world, okay? And that's come from years and years of growth and practice of the McDonald's system. It's very consistent. Now, what that means for brand value is that when someone is buying into an existing McDonald's or selling an existing McDonald's, their value is determined in large part not based upon their profits, like a normal business sale, but based in large part on that brand value. A buyer knows that people are going to keep coming to McDonald's, not for the hamburgers, but for the consistency. And it's very interesting. Think of Subway. Subway is bigger than McDonald's, all right? And we don't often talk about Subway. And I apologize if we represent Subway, but I don't care for their products at all. But they're consistently bad, that's for sure, all right? And they're huge. They're one of the largest, if not the largest franchisor in the world, all right? And it does have brand value. But again, brand value is important, but brand value isn't everything if you buy into a system that you're not making enough money to do the things that you want to do. And again, I'm not all about money, but business and business ownership is in large part driven by I'm successful if I'm making a profit. Of course it is, because otherwise, why spend your time and energy and risk it all, for a system that, in McDonald's case, had a 20% failure rate with the SBA. That's pretty big.
Yeah, I agree. So there was actually a article in the Wall Street Journal, and someone sent it to me last week. It was within the past few weeks, and it was talking about franchise systems, big giant franchise systems, and how they handled the pandemic with their franchisees. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they were talking about, how they were kind of squabbling and going back and forth, mm-hmm. Between the needs and wants of those large franchise systems and their franchisees. One of the things that they mentioned is that Subway put out this mandatory $10 foot-long sub, mm-hmm. and as a result of that, the franchisees revolted and said, we're not going to do this $10 foot-long sub because it's not profitable. We would be operating at a loss. And so they went back and forth because of those price restrictions. And this isn't the first time I've heard this with these larger franchise systems. I know Fantastic Sam's, which is one of the brands that we ran, they had a situation early in their history where the owner, Sam, he had a promotion where he did a $1 haircut, I believe. And that $1 haircut for kids bankrupted some of those franchisees. And he ended up having all these lawsuits to combat that one decision. And so that price restrictions and what you can charge for certain things or certain promotions that go out there, that is something that, how does a franchisee protect themselves from that situation and make sure that when they go into a franchise, they're not going to be put in a situation where they would lose money on the products that they sell? What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? It put Steak and Shake essentially out of business, right? Because you had this sit-down restaurant with table service, and Steak and Shake required all these menus, these dinners to be served for $4. Well, do the math, okay? You can't pay your lease costs and your insurance and your utilities and your employees and everything else, your supplies, and make any money on $4. But what did people want when they went to Steak and Shake? They wanted $4. Look at Quiznos. Quiznos had 7,800 locations, much better, in my opinion, than Subway sandwiches. But the franchisor forced them to sell $4 meals, all right? And it put them out of business. I bet you can't find a Quiznos today. And I bet if you looked at the locations, they have less than 200 locations. I haven't looked at them recently. So look at McDonald's, the dollar value menu. You think the franchisees like that? What can you sell for $1 and make any money? And the franchisor, they take their royalty. So if they're charging an 8% royalty, the first 8 cents on every dollar that you're already losing money on is going to the franchisor, all right? Now, with big brands, you're not going to be able to negotiate. As Amanda said, There's more flexibility with smaller growing brands. And by smaller, I say under 100 units. But that's my feeling on what a smaller franchise is. There's not going to be flexibility at a McDonald's level. All right. If we say to McDonald's, let's say we're lucky enough to have McDonald's say, we want to reward you with a franchise, they're not going to agree with us that we'll never have to be subject to a $1 or a value menu. Okay. With smaller brands, we can negotiate these things. All right. But you don't negotiate it by saying, I never want to sell items for $1. Okay. You negotiate it by asking for this in the modification agreement. Franchisor will not require franchisee to sell products or services at a loss. It's that simple, at a loss. Very simple language, all right? And if the Steak and Shake franchisees had that provision in their franchise agreements, or Quiznos, or in the McDonald's case with the dollar menu, which you really don't see that much anymore. If you take a look at McDonald's, and we're going to talk about pressuring the franchisor as well in those big systems, and a distinction between a big system and a smaller system. But if they had such a provision, then when Steak and Shake comes to you and says, by the way, you got to sell 10 different meals for $4, and you do the math and you're losing money, you say, no way. Now, breaking even is not a profitable situation either. By definition, it's breaking even. But understand, for every person who comes in for the $4 menu, there's people like me who are going to get the double steak burger with a bowl of chili, the chili 5 ways, and a chocolate shake, okay? I don't care about the $4 menu. I just like the food, all right? So you teach your employees the upsell, all right? And everything is about the upsell in business anymore. What else can we sell you? What else can we interest you in? Now, with that said, as these brands get bigger, as the franchisee base gets bigger, also the strength of the franchisees gets bigger. In the case of McDonald's, there's a very powerful franchisee association that if the franchisor now does something wrong in terms of the franchisees, that franchisee association is going to push back. That's one of the benefits, that is one of the benefits of a large franchise system. But again, you have to weigh it, right? Do you really want to suffer the pain and put your fate in the hands of a franchisee association, or do you kind of want to know what you're going to get when you go into a franchise? If it were me investing, I kind of want to know how it's going to go for me. If we get a great franchisee association, I think that's lovely, all right? But I want to be able to control my business if that franchisee association doesn't really work for me the way I wanted it to, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think that there is this pushback that we're seeing in the Wall Street Journal. That's what it was talking about. The franchisees were pushing back and getting management groups and their associations to kind of force the franchisor to move in another direction. And they have leverage to be able to do that. But I only really hear of these stories, and maybe it's just my world, but I only hear of them with the really, really big brands. You don't hear them as much with the smaller, younger, mid-sized brands. And I have really spent a lot of time trying to think about that. Why is that? And the thing that kind of dawned on me one day is that every single time a franchise system renews their disclosure documents. So they're required to do these disclosure documents every single year. And in it has the franchise agreement. So every year when they renew, they change and modify the agreement. So each iteration, they get more strict and more strict and more strict and more strict and more strict. So when you're buying at the later time, when the franchise brand has already blown up, they've already been super successful, they have hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of franchisees in the system, you're getting that agreement after they've already gone 1,000 times through with other people and have already had those problems and have built that agreement to protect themselves from any lawsuits. So that iteration of the agreement is not as good for you as the franchisee as some of these other size brands where you do have more flexibility, more rights. You haven't gone through as many of those iterations. That's my view of it. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, one thing that I've seen recently in more and more franchise agreements is, let's talk about the pricing issue. Okay, they say we will give you a suggested range of prices and you need to fit somewhere in there. Okay, and I think it's important before we leave that topic as to why franchisors do require franchisees to do things in a relatively uniform way. So if you go to Sabrina's McDonald's and her double cheeseburger is $2.50, and you come to my McDonald's and it's $5.50, all right? You go, what in the world is McDonald's doing? You don't say, what in the world is Eric doing? You're saying, now this consistency is gone. I just paid $50 for me and my kids to eat at McDonald's at Eric's place, but when I went to Sabrina's McDonald's, it was $20, okay? You're mad at the brand, okay? So consistency is good for everybody. And that's something that I always tell prospective franchisees when they see a suggested range of prices, when they see all these, you got to do this and you got to do that, okay? Think about it in terms of building brand value through a consistent consumer experience. That's good for everybody. That's good for everybody. But to your point, Sabrina, as franchisors get bigger, many times they lose the distinction between the right to do something pursuant to their agreement and whether it's right to do something pursuant to their agreement. I've often dealt with franchisors' attorneys who will say, well, we have a right to do this. Okay, I represent a franchisee association. And in a similar circumstance, we went to the franchisor and said, look, this is the issue, all right? And the franchisor's attorney says, well, we have a right to do so. And I asked her point blank, but is it right to do so? Is it right to do so? When 80% of your franchisees are saying, this is a bad move, all right? And so sometimes franchisors lose the distinction. Now, the reverse is true as well. Sometimes franchisors learn when to exercise authority and when not to exercise authority. And I do think, we're picking on McDonald's a little bit, I do think McDonald's has learned that over the years, with some mistakes, rather late in its life, but I think it's learning to, well, I'll give you an example. I bought a latte from McDonald's this morning, all right? It was $4. The franchisee is thrilled, okay? Because they're making buku bucks off a $4 latte, okay? The coffee is about like this, okay? And the rest of it is just froth, okay? You drink it and it's like, hey, where's the coffee? Okay, oh yeah, it's right there at the bottom, all right? So I do think some of these bigger systems that you don't hear franchisees complaints on as much are learning when to exercise their authority and when not to exercise their authority.
Yeah, that article also was talking about Pizza Hut, saying that they're focused on repairing and restoring franchisee relationships.
Yeah.
And I know Cinnabon and they had a big movement in the last 10 years where they were going out and restoring relationships with franchisees and just really connecting with them. So I know that happens too. Yeah. Amanda, do you mind sharing with us what you think some of the advantages are of these empire brands? So what are the things that they bring to and offer franchise owners?
Well, it's a system that has been proven. It's a proven model. And it's one of the pros of getting into a well established model who has brand recognition, who has a strong marketing system, who has lots of support, lots of money, right? I think, well, not always. Let me, yeah, not because, not just because it's an empire brand doesn't mean that they're well capitalized, but usually, if you're dealing with a model that is all over the place and they're growing, and it's usually an indication that they are well capitalized and that they're able to support their franchisees pretty well, right? So I would say those are the biggest pros of getting into a system that has already been proven. I think there's a lot more cons than pros. That's just my opinion, and based on what I have seen with a lot of newer and even models that are still in the growth sector. But other than proven system, getting having the infrastructure, being able to collaborate with other franchisees that are in the same market as you, having the ability to validate with owners that have already been running and operating for a long time. So it's when you're looking at financials of the system, and what is the day in the life of a franchisee, and you hear that over and over and over again, and it's been done so many times that it's a system that has been replicated and it has been done over and over again. So really your chances of succeeding are a little bit higher, because if they have a strong retention rate, which is another topic obviously, but considering that it's a brand that is successful, that franchisees are actually renewing the agreement, they're staying, they're proven to be successful, it's easier to validate.
So I know you pretty well, and I know that like one of your main drivers in business, like you love the experience of helping people grow and build something big, like build an empire, build something where they can have the latitude to be able to experience that growth. So I can understand how your kind of proclivity would be to brands that allow people the room to build larger businesses, whereas some of these empire brands, they just have more restrictions on access into the system, and then also how many units and things you can scale with. But I would say that from my experience in working with different systems and working with just different franchise professionals and franchisees, there are some really strong empire brands out there that have everything kind of worked out for you, and they do a lot in the way of checking in on their franchise owners and making sure those franchise owners are successful. So there's a lot more like oversight and management in some of them, not all of them, but in some of them. And if someone is coming from a background that is very highly corporate, and they are comfortable in that kind of setting where there's just a lot of that oversight, then an empire brand might be a really good fit for them, because it's a more natural transition, instead of being more of a creative type and more of a process person, but also innovator, which is required more with the emerging partner and plug and play. You have to, with those brands, you can still pick brands that have a really high retention rate and wonderful support, and access to someone to answer your questions at any time, and all these wonderful things. But there is a certain amount of creativity in those types of businesses, where you can kind of design your path. What's your path for growth, and where do you, they'll give you the marketing pieces and kind of give you the plan, but you have more freedom as to where you're going to do what advertising, and building the culture maybe a bit differently than some of the other like larger systems. So anyway,
yeah, you made a really good point. when you say there's more oversight, there's more support, but you also have to pay for it, right? So if you're the type of candidate who likes to have that structure, because yes, you come from a corporate environment, you're used to, A, B's, and C's, and you're very systematic, and you want to be part of a model that has been replicated over and over again, and you don't mind paying the price for it, go right ahead, right? It may be, it may be for you, but I also know, and I know, other brokers from our group are very well aware of other systems that are not Empire, but they're still very structured, because it really boils down to obviously the number of units, but also the leadership strategy. How many people are actually kind of running that system, and it doesn't have to be an Empire. It could be a plug and play that has hundreds of units, and yes, you're not gonna have the flexibility, creativity, flexibility. I mean, that's out the door. You follow a system, it's not like you're going to go into you're going to see a show and you're going to think, oh, maybe I should set up a booth here and market my franchise. But if that's not in the agreement, you're going to have to ask for permission. And if the franchisor says no, it's a no. Mm-hmm. Where if you were part of a newer model, more flexible model, they could easily say, wow, thank you so much for bringing that up. We're going to incorporate that in our system. So what type of person are you, and what are your goals? So that it's what it boils down to.
Yeah, the personality profile does make a huge difference. One of the things, Eric, that I want to go back to, because I think it's a really important point, is I want to talk about the associations, and like how the franchisors in Empire Brands manage those relationships. So I was reading something that was saying that there's got to be this balance of power between the franchisor and the franchisees. And oftentimes the franchisors, and in it said, this isn't a democracy, but it's also not a dictatorship. And you had made a comment before about, the franchisors making sure that they were fair. How do the franchisee associations help to accomplish that?
Yeah, and so remember that the relationship between franchisor and franchisee is not an adversarial one, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's trying to do the same thing. Franchisors, more than ever, particularly in 2020 with COVID, are trying to find ways to maximize their franchise unit volume, not because the franchisor wants to make more royalties, although that would be nice, but because the franchisor doesn't want to reflect a whole bunch of failures in its FDD. And 2020 is going to reflect it was a tough year, right? And for those of us who are used to creating our own legacies through business ownership, current company accepted, I never ever thought that we would be dealing with the things that we're dealing, and none of us did. I had to look up pandemic to figure out what in the heck a pandemic was, right? and now we all know, because we're told nightly on the news about the pandemic. What I said to my franchisors is that the creation of a franchisee association is a good thing. And this is the reason why. If I have to deal with John in Cleveland and Sally in Miami and Jim in LA and so on and so forth, all right, it becomes very tiring and it becomes very inefficient. Jim's got a complaint, Sally's got a complaint, John's got a complaint. But if I help to create the franchisee association as the franchisor, the complaints don't come to me. The complaints go to the franchisee association. Then I talk to limited representatives, many times only one person, the liaison of the franchisee association, and I can have a weekly or a monthly, preferably a weekly meeting with that person, and they are on the pulse of the franchisees. That's who the franchisees direct their, hey, we don't think we're getting enough support, or hey, we don't think we're, doing this right or that right. So it actually promotes a more harmonious relationship between franchisor and franchisees. Now, there's an exception to that, as there always is, all right? In every system, you have bad franchisees. It's human nature, all right? I always ask people, if you get a group of 10 people together, how many jerks are in that group, all right? And I will say Sabrina's always telling me to watch my language, so she was waiting for me to say something worse.
Oh no, what
How
is he
many
gonna say?
jerks are in that group? At least 2, all right? And I'm being very conservative here. And if you don't believe me, get on your Facebook account tonight and make a post that's political in nature, all right? Within the 10th comment, someone is going to be calling you very bad things, all right? And if you're lucky, they're not related to you, all right? There's a lot of jerks out there, and that's true in every system. So what am I getting at? Even with a strong franchisee association, even though that's a good thing for franchisees and franchisors, many times the people who just can never be happy, probably shouldn't have bought a franchise, all of a sudden they're going, well, I don't think the franchisee association is doing much for me, all right? Because that's just their nature. Anybody of authority, even their own association, then becomes the problem, right? So now they're complaining about their franchisee association. Just understand, as you do your due diligence, no matter what size of franchise you're dealing with, you're always going to get a negative Nancy or I mean, that's just human nature.
Yeah. So I've experienced that when they have a franchisee association, that's always a good thing, because you have kind of an advocate and some group of people who are living the experience as a franchisee, who have the ear of the franchisor and can influence them, make them open to and aware of their decisions. Sometimes they're making decisions based on a view, and it's not necessarily consistent with what the franchisees are living. And so in that Wall Street Journal article, it was saying that the franchisees felt like, or the franchise system was saying franchisees can sometimes be short-sighted, looking at only the current moment now, whereas the franchise system has to look long-term and focus on what is the long-term strategy. And so they said that there's sometimes conflict, because they will do something like say, we need to upgrade our look and feel of the brand. We need to make sure that we're advancing the image of the brand and make sure that's upgraded. And so those kind of forced upgrades, sometimes franchisees don't want to put the money into it. And so that's an example of the franchisee and the franchisor kind of having a difference and needing to come to some agreement where they both feel that they're doing the right thing for the good of the system and for the good of all of their businesses, while still knowing that the franchise system can and does require that per the contracts. So Eric, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so it's a great point. So let's go back to this we versus them thing, right? Which is a little adversarial, right? We, the franchisees, versus them, corporate, okay? When the franchisee association is used in its best case, the franchisee association is we. That's our voice. It's like our union, right? It's like our labor union. They're our voice, all right? And to be best used, the franchisee association needs to be their voice of the franchisees, a true voice, not how can the leaders of the association make things best for them, but how can they make things best for all franchisees within reason. Again, Debbie Downer's never going to be pleased, so you got to, in the end, you got to disregard her, quite frankly, and focus on the bulk of the franchisees. All right. And so that's credibility for the franchisees and for the franchisee association. Okay. This is part of us. Now, what the franchisor has to do is truly involve that franchisee association. All right. You can't just create a franchisee association and then disregard it. Those individuals on the franchisee association should be in the know with the franchisor. Franchisor wants to run out a new trademark, a new marketing campaign, a new McRib sandwich, all right? The franchisee association representatives should be in on the ground floor, because if the franchisee association goes back to the franchisees and say, we are really excited about this. We have been involved in the progress of this. We've seen the test markets. We've seen the responses. Now you've sold it to your whole franchisee base. All right. That's when the franchisee association is working best. And again, that's what I encourage all franchisors. Now, if you have 15 units, it's probably not time for a franchisee association. But I think at 100 units or above, it's probably time for an association. And if I was a franchisee, I would want to be part of that association. And generally, franchisee associations are made up of, what do you think? Franchisees. And they get elected like a board member does of a board of directors of a corporation, and they spend a year or so on. So it's, again, when it works well, it works amazingly well for both franchisees and franchisors.
Yeah, it seems like it's trying to help people communicate and have empathy and understanding for one another so that they can have a better relationship together and make sure that they are progressing as a unit, not just as an individual, which one of our core values is to create an interconnected community. And that is where everybody's independent, but we're all working so tightly together that we're advancing the cause for every single one of us. And that's what the beauty of franchising can be, whenever those communication channels and that empathy and understanding are alive and well within the system. Amanda, do you want to, I know you've been really passionate about, mid-sized brands. So how would you describe helping someone to have the same level of confidence, the same level of, I want this to be a sure bet kind of approach to one of those mid-size or smaller brands? What would you advise?
So it's providing them with the tools to be able to conduct proper due diligence. So just like you have to analyze an empire brand, you have to do the same with a newer brand or a mid-sized brand. So really understanding who you're going to be working with. So the franchisor's background, what's their experience? Have they been in the same business for a long time? Have they operated locations before? How long have they been a business? So that's all part of the due diligence, which actually takes months. This is not something that you are connecting with the brand and a month later you're signing. Some of these processes, they can take, up to 3 months, right? Of every day, almost every day, you're on some type of call. You're talking to the marketing director, you're talking to the leadership team, you're validating with owners, so getting the data from franchise owners and understanding what's their experience been like with the franchise system. And you're going to hear a mix of everything. And one of the things that FBA brokers will help you with is to really make sure that you're asking the right questions and that you're understanding what you're hearing. Because a lot of times you may think that the franchisee is not happy with the system, but it could be that they're just not a good fit for the model, right? So when you're asking those questions and trying to gather the data, if your priority is to make money, if you really want to get to a certain profitability, you have to ask questions that are related to, do you have a manager? Did you hire a manager? Are you running it as an owner operator? How much did you invest initially? Did you get a loan? Did you not get a loan? I mean, all of those questions that if you've never gone through a process in buying a business before, you really need that help. And unfortunately, that's not something that the franchisor is going to help you with. It's something that, when you work with a professional, they can guide you and give you the right types of questions to be asking those people. So in just trying to summarize everything, it's almost the same as analyzing an empire brand, but really going through the process, conducting proper due diligence, and really finding whether you want to take the risk. At the end of the day, it's going to be a risk, and we help you to minimize that. But the definition of risk is different for everybody. I would say I'm more of a risk taker, but it's because of my knowledge and because of the things that are important to me. So I know that if there was an emerging brand that had great potential, so the longevity, so the long-term goal would be a lot bigger for me if I did it early. So I would then help somebody to analyze that and to be able to identify whether that could potentially be a good fit or not. Or if somebody else is looking for something more stable, then we show brands that are a lot more stable. So it really boils down to you finding and that's my homework to you. If you haven't thought about that yet, is really writing on a piece of paper, what are your top 5 goals that you want to accomplish in a business? And once you know that, it's going to be really easy for you to tell that to other people, to franchises, to a franchise broker, so you can identify and find the right types of franchises that could be a good fit for you.
Thank you for that. So I just want to remind everyone that it is truly a custom experience that you go through. Every single person that is looking for a franchise has a completely different story, completely different wants, backgrounds, risk tolerance, needs. And because of that, the franchise that is right for them is going to be completely different. It is not just about which franchise has lines around the building. It is about what is you and your profile, and then what is a good franchise for that profile, and what is the right market that type of business will work best in. And those 3 points of the triangle, they have to line up: you, the franchise, and the market. And so we just encourage you, as you go through this process, to make sure that you are doing proper due diligence. And the things that you need when you do proper due diligence are to speak to a franchise expert, like a franchise broker. We've got highly qualified ones here. We 100% advise you to get legal counsel. Even if the franchise says they don't negotiate the agreement, you need to understand the agreement. There are things in that agreement that can bind you for the long term, like Eric provided earlier, and it is critical that you understand them ahead of time so you know how to prepare and build the right path for yourself. You have to make sure that you've done a financial review of that franchise, and then you also have to make sure that you have the proper funding mix, and that you've had that funding mix looked at by an accountant. That accountant can tell you if that funding mix is set up for long-term wealth, or if that funding mix is set up for long-term poverty. There is a difference, and you have to know those things in order to have the best long-term strategy for you. We want you guys to have a good team in the process, and having people like this, having experts is a critical component of it. So I just want to thank our panel so much for coming on today, and I want to thank all of you for your attendance. I also want to let you know that we have a speed round coming up on in December. It is the Home-Based Franchises Equal Freedom speed round. That is on December 17th at 5:30 p.m. and you can go to findinggoodfranchises.com to get registration information for that. And just remember that we're here to help you to find good franchises, and that means a franchise that is good for you for the long term. And we do that by helping you strategically position yourself in your business so that you can own the best franchise for you. And we want to make sure that you guys are all on the right path for success. So our brokers are expertly trained, and we'll be happy to match you with one of them should you so be inclined. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a good evening. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions at this time. All right. Okay, so thanks so much. This is great information. I'm representing 3 billionaire business clients looking for U.S. franchise consultants for the international market to bring top U.S. franchises to South Africa, Nigeria, and the Middle East. Their interest is in Starbucks, McDonald's, Dunkin', Hardy, Dairy Queen, Shake Shack. My clients want to buy these franchises or licenses. Eric, we'd like to work with you to bring the franchises that you represent to South America and Nigeria. Oh, okay. Is that, oh, that's all one. So it looks like there are 6 questions, but that's all one question done in multiple things. Okay, so it doesn't look like, Eric, you provided your contact information there.
Yeah.
And
we can take it offline. Sure.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Any other questions before we close out for the day? All right. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Again, thank you so much for joining us and helping you to find good franchises. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.